so incredibly lucky in the modern age that we have access to information, that all the mysteries of the world are at the tips of our fingers. And although we don't know everything, there's so much that we've uncovered. And what was at one point esoteric and reserved for the privileged few is now public domain. And in spite of all of this, people seem to be more interested in manufactured realities rather than the incredible cosmos we find ourselves embedded in. Access to knowledge and the incredible benefits that knowing these things has on the day-to-day life of every individual. I would suggest that scientific communication done well is even more valuable than scientific research. So an example of this would be, if you look at the Soviet Union, in spite of their soul-crushing authoritarian regimes, the absolute proclivity and incentive to lie and to destroy others, they still somehow produced incredible levels of scientific achievement and success in the Olympic Games. It's kind of hard to understand how this is possible, yet their culture did not have rock stars other than maybe certain politicians. They didn't have actors or entertainers. What they did have were either politicians, which was absolutely fraught with all sorts of terrors, and probably one of the more dangerous professions that one could engage in. So, for the average person, you could either dream to become an Olympic champion, which the chances were very slim that you could achieve that, or you could become a scientist, which was far more feasible for the average person. So there was tremendous incentive for the average person to pursue science, and their propaganda machine was geared towards building these professions up to be rock stars for the glory of the communist machine. Quite obviously, it would be a mistake to try to recreate the dystopian nightmare of the Soviet Union so that way we could further scientific progress. But this is entirely unnecessary. In America, we don't need shame, fear, or the destruction of one's reputation or career. Rather, we can inspire people through awe and curiosity and passion. And it's far more valuable for us to use these methods. So if we think that shame is a necessary tool for the promotion of scientific progress and good ideas, it's much better to suggest using a carrot rather than a stick. It's difficult for me to try and a challenge to put these ideas together because the thesis of this video is essentially, one, the significance of science communication, and the other would be the dangers of attacking people, the dangers of shame and reputation destruction. I'd be remiss if I left out, in my opinion, the most egregious example of this sort of behavior, a behavior that I see as being extremely common in academic circles, in science communication, that is basically this desire to punish ignorance, this desire to punish bad ideas. And the most egregious example would be a YouTuber named Professor Dave Explains. Watching his videos, it's quite obvious that his major objective seems to be to attack anyone who disagrees with him. One thing I've found extremely valuable has been to try and understand people that I disagree with. One of his favorite targets seems to be flat earthers. And as I've had discussions with flat earthers, I realized if you're genuinely trying to understand them, what you see is that they're not stupid, it's that they're extremely skeptical. That no matter what evidence you provide, they just dismiss it because they don't trust whatever your source is. So rather than engaging with your arguments, they simply dismiss them. And what I've found effective is to challenge that notion, because their entire foundation seems to be, well, how do you trust that? And when you ask them that question, because they will show you pictures of this ice barrier and all of these continents that exist outside, when you ask them why you trust that, it seems like that's the first time they've been asked that. You can say, oh, this is nonsense, but when you ask in that way, in a respectful way, rather than being defensive, it seems as if it causes them to pause and to rethink their position. And if your goal is to genuinely dispel ignorance, then your concern should be, how do I do this effectively? The more you shame somebody, the more you push them deeper into this entrenched position they've done themselves. If I called you a stupid asshole, you better believe this. The natural response would not be, oh yeah, you're right, I am a stupid asshole. The natural response would be, hey, fuck this guy. And would be to take this resistance approach. Whatever you say, I want you to be wrong. And I know this from personal experience because when I was younger, as a Christian, I believed, because people have pushed this narrative that evolution and belief in God are antithetical, that you have to believe one or the other. And if you believe one, well, you're stupid. If you believe the other, you're this enlightened being. And I always rejected that notion. So that caused me to reject, to dismiss, to try and find ways to not believe this. So rather than accept things on the basis of merit, I wanted to reject this argument because the people pushing this argument, in my opinion, were jerks. And again, if your goal is to promote good ideas, to try to mitigate bad ideas, the best way to do this is not through shame, not through insult, rather through trying to understand the position and to argue for better ideas. Major motivations for making this video was a video that I saw with Dave Farina and Professor James Tour. If you look at Dr. James Tour, he's a renowned molecular biologist who's made major advancements in nanotechnology, a respected professor, and a genuinely admirable human being. He's someone who will take time to have discussions about faith with random people on YouTube. I put this to the test. I asked him, to have a Zoom meeting with me, and he took the time. It was quite obvious that he was tired. He probably had a long day, and he still took the time, 20, 30 minutes, to have a discussion with a stranger about faith. And I thought, whether or not you agree with this guy, whether or not you think he's saying something that's valid, you have to respect his integrity. You have to respect the fact that he truly believes what he says. And Dave Farina spent the entire time calling him an idiot, a liar. And when the audience started to turn against him because of his behavior, he said, shut, like, you guys understand what we're talking about.
I do what Donna Blackman says. You quote mine her. You have no idea what her research is about. You just pretend to. It's amazing. Lies and cheers. As though you people have any fucking clue what any of us are talking about. Oh, I know about RNA. No, you don't. You have no clue what either of us are saying. Deal with it.
And he just ridicules everyone. And it's so frustrating to see this sort of behavior. And this sort of behavior is apparently championed in all sorts of academic circles. Trying to understand why, and I think I do. And I think that fundamentally this is antithetical to proper science communication. As I went through Reddit posts about Dave Farina, I found two things. One is people that are absolutely appalled by his behavior, who reject his approach. And another would be people who support it. And I tried to understand the approach where people supported it, and it seemed as if they thought it was good for society. And my understanding is that human beings have this sort of threat detector built inside of them. When we see something we see as dangerous to us or to society, that this threat detector goes off and we want to mitigate whatever it is we see as a threat. So either we reduce it, we punish it, or we destroy it. And it seems as if what many people see as ignorance or misinformation, that they see this as detrimental to science and to society, and so they want to punish it. And the way that they believe is best in terms of punishing is this shame, this ridicule. But I would argue that not only is that counterproductive, not only does that push people further away from whatever your position is, but it seems as if it's not the primary motivation. It seems, if I had to guess, that one of the major motivations, and I think human beings are multifaceted, so there's always going to be multiple motivations for doing something. Part of that could be this fear of this thing we see as dangerous. But if simultaneously you can elevate yourself, if you can make yourself feel better by bullying others, by ridiculing their intelligence, then I think that motivation can be this underlying corruption that causes us to do things that may not actually be what we say. It may be less about defeating ignorance and more so about elevating ourselves. And I would suggest videos by Mike Benz. I find his videos incredibly fascinating because he talks a lot about this counter misinformation movement that is happening in the intelligence agencies and how these tactics are used on other countries to essentially gain control of these countries, to build assets for intelligence communities. Now, whether or not you believe that, I think he makes a pretty compelling argument, and I would suggest those videos because they seem to be pushing the same narrative, that misinformation, that ignorance, that certain narratives, certain perspectives are dangerous, and we should do whatever we can to silence those. We should censor them, or we should shame them. We should simply dismiss them, or do whatever means are at our disposal to avoid these sorts of views. But what's so fascinating is when you try to understand people, you see that there are so many similarities between people. The flat earthers are motivated by just a complete refusal to believe certain sources of evidence. And I see that in academic circles as well, in atheistic communities. This idea that anything that exceeds our metaphysical boundaries can be dismissed. That anything that isn't concordant with the materialistic, nihilistic reductionism it's not worth taking seriously. And so you don't have to confront that seriously, you can just ignore it. Because whatever is sourced from that is obviously wrong. And what I've noticed with the flat earthers as well is they take this incredible pride in having seen through this deception that has plagued all of humanity. In the same way that atheists do. That religion is this deception, the greatest deception of all time, that has deceived countless generations of human beings. And they are this evolved intelligence that's capable of seeing through this great deception. So again, as you begin to actually try and understand people, you see that there are so many similarities between us. That whether you believe in flat earth, atheist, whether you're Christian, that we see these same sort of dogmas, these same tactics used from all of these different kinds of perspectives. Not this complete dismissal of anything that challenges your views, this complete contempt for anything that disagrees with your metaphysical presumptions. You can shame people, that you can attack people, that you can hate people for believing differently than you, that you can see yourself as being morally superior or intellectually superior or whatever it is because you believe this and they believe that. We see this repeated itself, not just in religion, not just in atheism, not just in flat earthers, not just in scientists or whatever. That this same behavior is repeating cycle in any group. That this behavior is a continuing pattern in all groups, in all perspectives. What science should be is, rather than a tool to shame people who disagree with you, it should be a tool that allows us to explore the world, that allows us to view the world in all of these different interesting angles. And one of the worst detriments to scientific exploration, the limiting factor of this dogma, that anybody who strays outside of the norm is promoting pseudoscience. And anyone who's pushing what I believe to be a bad idea, they're a bad person, and they should be shamed and mocked because of their perspective. And what this does is it creates generations of scientific researchers and theoretical thinkers who are afraid to explore. They're afraid to speculate. I mean, there's so many examples. One of the more prominent would be the polywater debacle, where the Soviet Union produced papers about this interesting category of water. When it was found that there were contaminants in the water, it was dismissed as this pseudoscience nightmare, that anyone who goes down this avenue should be ashamed for even considering it. Yet with recent findings, what we're discovering is this rebranded polywater, which is now called exclusionary zone water, has all sorts of very interesting properties that may be useful for our understanding of the origins of life, for all sorts of different facets of life on Earth. Water is the basis of life. It's one of the more important aspects. 70% of the volume of the human being is water. So to understand all of the things associated with water, to understand its properties, is absolutely vital for understanding life. And the fact that people were so afraid to explore this idea because it was pseudoscience, because you'd be ridiculed, it set us back. The fact that there are incredible scientists, that there are Nobel-winning scientists that are afraid to discuss things, that are afraid to speculate things to the public, that they keep it to themselves until they're absolutely certain of its validity. I mean, one of the benefits of having a large number of people and all sorts of different minds that can tackle things from different perspectives, that bring their own things to the table. If you express ideas, the fact that all of these people can weigh in, that they can criticize the idea, not the individual, but the idea. And then if I put out an idea and it's flawed and people point out those flaws and I can learn from that, that furthers our understanding. So people shouldn't be afraid to speculate. They should be afraid to hold on dogmatically to speculative ideas. But to speculate, to think, to produce ideas, we should be able to do so freely, without fear of shame and ridicule. And so this pejorative pseudoscience, to me, is one of the greatest detriments to science. It doesn't limit ignorance. I think it enforces dogma, enforces a certain way of looking at the world. This rigid, dogmatic, lifeless way of looking at the world. People should be free to have bad ideas, because to think is to have bad ideas. Over time, you would hope that you refine your process of thinking, so that way you remove the impurities of these bad ideas, that you can refine them into something more pure, more effective, more useful. But just like in nature, we produce all sorts of variations, and most of those variations are not successful. But the few that are persist over time, and this isn't something you could predict. Using Stephen Wolfram's idea of computational irreducibility, it's impossible to predict the unfolding of this incredibly complex system we call the universe. And so for us to constrain this environment as much as possible, to only allow a certain worldview to persist and to propagate, we're severely limiting ourselves in terms of innovation, in terms of exploration. There's a quote from Whitehead that suggests, our ideas die so we don't have to. What this means is we can produce bad ideas, and we can test those against each other. And the ones that survive, the ones that persist, are the ones that have tremendous value. But to limit these, to try and create circumstances so people can't produce ideas, that they can only produce what we want to be good ideas, but again, it's impossible. This combinatorial explosion of complexity makes it impossible for us to predict what ideas are good and what ideas will persist, what ideas will revolutionize the world. To limit ourselves is to limit progression, is to limit discovery. Another quote is, science progresses one funeral at a time. And I think this is significant because quite often in the West, especially, I think more so than women, men feel this lack of validation. They feel like they're disposable, that especially if you fall into this nihilistic view that we're just atoms in the void, that the universe is just cold, pitiless indifference. Your life feels like it is truly disposable, that it is truly meaningless. And when you feel this, and when you don't get this validation you seek from your environment, and for most people interested in science and philosophy, the validation they seek is attribute that they think gives their life meaning and makes them a valuable person. Quite often that's intelligence. And if they don't get that validation for their intelligence from their environment naturally, they try to create it. And unfortunately, the way we create it is quite often through not elevating each other, but through pushing each other down. And in relationship to this person I'm pushing down and bullying and mocking and ridiculing, that I feel elevated. And we see the downsides of this in science quite often, where as you begin to feel as if your value as a person comes from your intelligence, and the fruits of your intellect are the ideas you produce, and this becomes your legacy, this becomes your identity, and someone challenges this, they're not challenging the idea anymore, they're challenging your identity. They're challenging you, your legacy, your future, your name, everything that makes you feel like your life has significance. They're challenging that. And your defense of this becomes less about defending science or defending truth or progressing human knowledge and understanding. It becomes more about protecting and promoting oneself. When this happens, especially when people become prominent, when they have positions of power, when they can allocate funding and research grants, when they can peer review others' work it gives them this incentive to attack ideas that challenge them. And when we create this environment in which attacking people is for the good of science, what we're doing is incentivizing the worst of humanity. We're incentivizing the destruction of anyone who differs from us. So in summary, rather than attacking people, rather than shaming people, what we should be doing is trying our best to focus on the positive qualities and to try to understand those who are different than us. Looking at Dave Farina, I think it seems obvious he's very bitter and resentful and unhappy. And I would hope that he sees that his behavior, that his hatred is the source of this. And if he would change just a little bit, if he would stop attacking people and start focusing on science communication, that if he would apologize for his attacks and try to make amends with the people that he's so viciously attacked, that it would make his life better, it would make the world better, that he has so much potential to do good for the world, and that his behavior right now is unacceptable, but doesn't mean that there's no hope for him. Doesn't mean that he can't make a positive difference. I think he has made in some capacity a positive difference, and I think he's done terrible things, but he has so much potential to do so much good. And for his followers, for the people who think that his behavior is justified, I would suggest that maybe your motivation is less about scientific progress, about moving human beings into a better future. It may be more about feeling better in relationship to these people that you mock, and that this sort of behavior, this sort of attitude will only make things worse. It'll only make you less happy. It'll only make scientific progress stagnant. Our understanding of the world lifeless and devoid of meaning or value. It becomes more of this sophistry, more of this power grab, rather this idea that we can elevate ourselves, and that this is the most important thing, that this should be disincentivized. And the only way to do this is through understanding and compassion and respect.